program that is taking the place of taxi driving all across the country. It's sweeping the nation. You might have even taken a ride on using an Uber driver, as we have heard from a previous speech from Jeffrey that he really enjoyed his Uber riding experience, so much so that he was advocating for it. You probably, though, haven't thought about becoming an Uber driver yourself, but proving that he's willing to seize the day, do a carpe diem thing, Jeffrey has decided to become an Uber driver himself. And so we're going to hear his experience of becoming an Uber driver. Jeffrey, would you please come up?
Wednesday last week, I'm reading one of my many magazines that I subscribe to, and that magazine had a 2-page article about a gentleman that decided to become an Uber driver for a week as an experiment. He enjoyed it, got to meet lots of interesting people, got to experience something he had never done, and made a little bit of money. I'm sitting there in my living room, sans my lovely wife Elizabeth, thinking to myself, you know what? My wife's out of town for the next week and a half. I have time on my hands, and this is something I've not only never done, I've never even contemplated doing it. So what the heck? I decided at age 59 to go ahead and become an Uber driver. If you're not familiar with Uber, it's a ride-sharing service where people call, like the old taxi days, on your phone only. You have to do it with a smartphone and an app, and you call for a ride service. Now, step one, you have to apply. Well, as you can imagine, they make this pretty easy. You can actually apply from within the app itself, which I did. I also did a lot of research while I'm applying as to what makes a good Uber driver, how to get through the various pitfalls you might run into, and it's actually pretty straightforward. You sign up for a background check, which they do free. You take your car down for an inspection to make sure it's worthy of being driven. And for me, the background check, they said, can take up to 2 weeks. From the time I subscribed, it took 7 hours. I remember telling a good friend of mine that if a boring 30-year accountant, a man who has never had a car accident, who's had 3 tickets in his life, and has never been involved with the law for any particular reason can't pass a background check, nobody can pass a background check. And sure enough, 7 hours, I'm cleared. So, just like that, I'm ready to be an Uber driver. My first weekend approaches. Friday, after getting off work, I decide to turn on my Uber app for the first time as I'm heading home. Nothing much happens for about 15 minutes. Until finally, about the time I'm wondering if this is even working, I get my first ping. I have a pickup. Off I go to the office park to pick up my very first rider. A lovely young lady who I'll call Mary. Wasn't her name, but I'm sure this is all confidential. I take her to her home in South Reno. She was at a doctor's office. She'd had her eyes dilated, and she realized she couldn't drive. Couldn't drive at all. So she had an Uber driver pick her up. We got to talking, and I told her she was my very first Uber pickup. And boy, did we have a wonderful conversation. She told me so many fun stories because she's been a business traveler all her life. And she said, Jeffrey, before Uber, I thought to get a ride, you had to get in a car that apparently was built in a factory without suspension, that apparently was coming from the factory with the filthiest seats you've ever imagined, and that it was mandatory that when you finished your ride, you felt grungy from having just been in there. Oh, and by the way, I assumed as a requirement to be a taxi driver, you were not allowed to speak English. She said, ever since I discovered Uber, oh my gosh, I'm in love. Clean cars because they're owned by the people. English speakers. They don't drive like maniacs because they're not desperate for the funds usually. It's a part-time gig. She couldn't say enough wonderful things. So my experience to start off with was great. Then I'm headed back home again. Just barely get home and get pinged again for my second ride. A wonderful young gentleman who I went and picked up from school and took home. This never even occurred to me that you would have parents, of course, give their kids smartphones, and they say, if you need a ride, just call an Uber driver. I mean, I don't guess he was like 15 years old, but he didn't have to have cash because it's all paid for on your Uber Smart app. So I took 3 rides that first night on Friday and decided that was enough for my opening night. I'm not really in this to make money, I'm just in it for the experience. So all weekend long, Saturday and Sunday, I'm picking up rides. Honestly, it was a lot of fun all weekend long because I never really met anybody but fun, enjoyable individuals. All had interesting stories to share. I got asked by 2 ladies I picked up downtown on Saturday. She said, "Aren't you ever concerned about your safety?" And I said, "Well, you gotta remember, this isn't like a taxi where an anonymous individual can hail you, you have no idea what's going on. Just to hail me, you have to have identified yourself, have to have entered a credit card. If you're going to use that to create criminal activity, you've got to be one of the dumbest individuals on the planet. Because as soon as you finish, the police are going to be waiting for you at your house, probably before you even get there, because they know who you are. They know we don't carry cash because it's all done through the Uber app. We're encouraged not to carry any cash at all. So I confess I wasn't really concerned about safety. So after my first weekend of driving an Uber, I had 10 rides. I was online for 10 hours and 43 minutes waiting for rides, and I made $93. What is that? $9.30? I don't know. It's not very much, but I'm not in this for the money. One of the interesting things that happens, and because I'm not depending on this for full-time living, obviously, is you don't get worked up when you don't get pinged for a while. I remember Sunday morning, I wake up, I'm thinking, the church crowd. I'm gonna get a lot of church business. Get myself dressed professionally, I'm ready to go, turn on my Uber app, 2 hours and 10 minutes go by before I get my first ping. Don't people take Uber to church? I mean, what's going on here? But really, I was at home just waiting, and so it doesn't bother you. It was just like, oh, okay, no big deal. I'm watching Sunday morning and reading the paper. So when you're not depending on a full-time living, you can be a bit blasé. My conclusion, I really loved my Uber experiment. I'm going to continue it for a week. I haven't decided whether I'm going to continue it at all. Obviously, I'm not going to do anything without checking with my wife first. So when Elizabeth comes home, I'm either going to have one of 2 stories. Honey, did I have a fun adventure and I'm never doing that again? Or, honey, I had a fun adventure this week and I think I'd like to continue it. Let me tell you about it. I have no idea what that conversation will be yet.